Next, we have Sheriff's Department.
Ready, John? Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Catherine Johnson. I'm the Undersheriff for the Office of the Sheriff, presenting on behalf of Sheriff Paul Miyamoto. I'd like to start with the idea that the Sheriff has a strategic plan, and within that plan, we have 6 goals. Those 6 goals I will talk about today throughout the presentation, but only as they intersect with the budget itself. And I want to start with our first 2 goals, which is protecting and engaging with San Franciscans. So as of July, we will deploy our emergency services unit into the Tenderloin and South of Market areas. The purpose of this deployment is to decrease drug sales in the area and reduce the amount of illegal drug use, or what's commonly referred to as open-air drug use, while improving public safety. The other thing that we do is we currently deploy our our warrant services unit. This is not a new function of the department. This has been around for years. They're plainclothes officers that seek out individuals who are wanted on warrants, primarily warrants emanating out of our community programs unit. And the third item on this particular point is, in fact, community programs. And I want to talk about electronic monitoring. So these are individuals who have been released by the Superior Court on an order of own recognizance, and as a level of supervision, the court has indicated that they should be monitored by electronic monitoring. These individuals, by far and vast, are charged with serious and violent crimes, primarily felonies, many of which are classified as serious and violent felonies, others as what's commonly referred to as excluded felonies. In the current data we reviewed, the caseload was at 490 new enrollments monthly, and that has increased to 515 enrollments, and the average days on EM has increased from 21 to 25. Also on this slide, you'll see an add-back request from pretrial. So the Sheriff's Office is the financial agent for SF Pretrial, and the pretrial folks administer pretrial services for the court, and their ask is for a $457,000 add-back in order to increase their case managers associated primarily with assertive case management. The National Association of Pretrial Services recommends a ratio of 40-1, and last year pretrial was at 52-1. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you'll see our demographics for our employees. The slide on the left is our employee demographics, both for our sworn staff and our professional staff. We are a very diverse department. The slide on the right speaks to our language access and how we engage with the community. We have 97 employees who are certified to converse in 6 different languages, and these certifications happen through the Department of Human Resources. And earlier this year, we implemented our bilingual nameplate program. So the staff that are bilingual and certified have a nameplate very similar to what Captain Ramirez is wearing, which indicates the language that they are certified to translate in. Next slide, please. Thank you. Also, under the category of engaging San Francisco, I really want to talk a little bit about the services we provide to the incarcerated population. So we have a discharge planning office. Our discharge planners are case managers that meet people at the time of release. They provide cab rides and safe harbor, so beds, bridge housing to individuals, and they work with coordinated entry to provide more permanent housing for individuals leaving jail. The other topic on this slide is increased out-of-cell time. For those that may know, we celebrated 5 Keys high school education earlier this week. Classes are back in session. The incarcerated population attend high school classes in a corridor very much like any high school that you may go and visit. And we recently graduated 16 incarcerated people this past week. A new endeavor that we're starting next week is access to the outdoors. So there will be a very specific section of our population that will be provided access to the outdoors, and that will start next week. Also, along with services, we provide tablets. Our tablet program has been in existence for decades. The new initiative with tablets is we will be providing direct access for the incarcerated population through the tablet with their case managers and social workers, and that's scheduled to start first week of July. The last thing on this slide I really want to talk about is CalAIM. So we applied for and were awarded a grant. The grant is in excess of $660,000 to provide Medi-Cal enrollment to individuals prior to their release. And the purpose of this is really to provide a continuum of care for individuals. So it's important that they get care while they're in our custody, and that care continues post-release. And that's what that grant seeks to do. I want to talk briefly about our survivor programs. We have had a survivor restoration program, which is a program that specifically helps victims of human trafficking and domestic violence. This program has also been in existence for decades, and it provides much work to needed victims of these violent crimes. And then we also have Cameo House. Cameo House provides long-term transitional housing for homeless and formerly incarcerated women and their children. This slide is our staffing. So you can see we are short about 185 deputies. Our goal is to fill 75 of those vacancies, and about 23% of our total work is done on overtime. That's about a 2% reduction from last year. And in terms of our mayoral reductions, we were able to meet 2.5% of those reductions. And I'll finish these last few quickly. This is a slide that shows that we, for the first time since fiscal year 18-19, we are projected to hire more deputies than we will separate. That's a huge accomplishment. And along those lines, we support longevity and retention premiums for staff. So it is important that we continue to keep our staff working longer while we continue to fill the vacancies that we have. The next slide is how we allocate our funding. About $289 million comes from the general fund. About $2.7 million comes from non-general fund dollars to include post reimbursements. We get money from the state for providing training to our staff. And I'm going to close out this presentation with metrics. I think it's important to identify some of our metrics. In this reporting period, we had 31 lives saved by the use of Narcan. That bears repeating. 31 people were saved because of Narcan deployment. On the slide, you'll see Deputy Barry Bloom. He does foot patrol between here, the plaza, and the library, and many of those lives were saved because of his interventions. We removed 10 guns from the gun violence restraining order program during the year. In excess of 32,000 people attended in-person court services. We placed 43 people in bridge housing, totaling 189 nights. We identified and removed more than 5,100 items of contraband from 3 sites. And then on the last slide, I will close with this. I think it's important for the board to know how some of the dollars are spent. We've implemented and completed the following projects. We introduced a Lexapol-based policy, which is online, so any member of the community can look at all our policies. We created our own report writing system. We were not funded for a report writing system, and we needed one, so we got together and created an in-house made program that we can monitor and audit reports. And we've also deployed Narcan to the inmate housing areas with the exception of the mental health pods. We had some environmental improvements, and then off to the right, there's 2 pictures. One is the parent-child visiting room that was updated in one of the atriums in the jail to allow incarcerated parents to see and communicate and have contact with their minor children. And the picture next to that is a capital project that was closed out this week. This is the industrial kitchen at County Jail 2. It is now fully operational and up and running, and it opened earlier this week. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think my Supervisor Ronan.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering, with such a major shortage of sheriffs, 185 FTEs, that's a lot, how you're able to lend 130 to this joint operation in the Tenderloin arresting people that are using drugs?
That's a great question. Thank you for the question. So the 135 is the total number of members in the emergency services unit. They will not all be deployed at one time. They'll be deployed in rotating teams, and they're usually 8-person teams.
So that's 8 people a day?
Correct.
Okay. So out of the 135, 8 people a day will be working on this operation. Where are they being pulled from?
So this is all going to be done on what we call an activation of our warrant services. So this is our emergency warrant services team, and there's an activation plan. And once the team gets activated, there's a rotation schedule for them.
But what work were they doing prior to this plan?
It varies. It could be anywhere throughout the department. So some of them were in our field operations division, some of them work in our custody operations division, some of them work in administration and programs, and others work in planning and projects. So they're scattered throughout the department.
How does this new responsibility impact your work?
Impact which? I'm sorry?
Impact your entire work. I mean, so for example, our office has been very concerned forever. We've had many meetings about the lack of speedy trial and the due process implications of that. And part of the problem was not having enough sheriffs to staff the courts. And so I'm just wondering what the impact of sort of diverting 8 people daily to a new operation has on these other problems that are pretty severe because of your understaffing.
Sure. We are understaffed. We have said that. We also, like I said earlier during the presentation, have, for the first time, we'll hire more than we separate. And again, this group of individuals will be primarily on overtime, so they will not affect the regular staffing of those particular other units that they work at.
Okay. I'm worried about this, but thank you.
Sure, no problem, Supervisor. Thank you.
I do want to follow up, sorry, Supervisor
Go ahead.
Safai, before I call on you. I do want to follow up. You did actually, though, I mean, you're a part of many city departments that came for a mid-year supplemental, along with the fire as a PUC this year for a total, not for everybody collectively together, it's about $65 million. Which the Sheriff's Department is actually part of that came in for that supplemental. And so clearly it was a mid-year supplemental. You were spending your overtime. So again, like, I kind of help me understand with this deployment, like this deployment, my assumption is within which fiscal year? Of this deployment? Is it upcoming fiscal year that you have, inclusive of the proposed budget, or is it the previous? Because it's just like a weird time. But of course, we do what demands of us. It's not,
Sure.
we don't do our work based on just the fiscal calendar, right? I think especially your work. And I just also want to say that the reason why I'm asking this is I do see that Sheriff's Department part of the public safety agency. In case you miss it, on my first day when I talk about in general, you are one of those categories that I am asking is that you have a baseline, your operation, which is, you staffing different public buildings and facilities, baseline. But I do expect you within your budget to have contingency. I do understand that in case of emergency, you are part of the team of public safety and first responder. So I am not in any way to say you cannot have a contingency and budget built in, but what I'm asking very specifically is, can you point to me where and how? And I can understand if this is part of your contingency plan, right? Like direction from the mayor, but help me understand where it is in your budget.
Sure. I know the sheriff wants to speak on this point as well, but just on the issue of funding and where it's derived from, the deployment of the ESU starts in July and is scheduled to conclude in December of this year, so it's for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. Okay. There's also a line item in our current budget that speaks to, it's in our base, about deployment and how much money we have to deploy emergency services unit members when needed. Okay. We will be utilizing those funds to start. That's about $685,000. Okay. And then the last thing I'll say about the appropriation is the appropriation that we made for the current fiscal year that we're in was to move over dollars from permanent salaries into overtime. And part of that ties into the fact that 23% of our work is done on overtime, whereas last year it was about 25% of our work. So our work on overtime has decreased 2%, or roughly 2%. So that's important to note, that it was an appropriation supplemental just to move funds over from permanent salaries to overtime.
Right,
Thank you.
then, sorry, I just want to make sure yes. Sheriff, please. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Good afternoon, members. I just wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to talk as well and not have the undersheriff stay up here the whole time. So happy to continue to answer any questions that you may have.
Was that the proverbial we?
What's that?
Was that the proverbial we?
That's the proverbial we, yes, Supervisor.
Curious.
Well, Sheriff, I think, again, it's like I said earlier, you're part of the first responder, public safety team, and just trying to understand. So does that mean within that 2% of saving? So the previous year is that you basically augment your salary into your overtime spending, and technically you are short staffed, right? Like just seeing your not just your presentation, but over the last 2 fiscal years for sure, you've been understaffed. So therefore, especially last fiscal year, given this given the situation now, you have to augment your salary into overtime spending. So with this deployment that you now are tasked with, you're budgeted at $685,000 for it, and that you see that will last you till the end of this year, December 2023. But my assumption also is, though, this is, while it is a task that you're asked to take on, not within your plan, and I understand the emergency of it, nature of it, or I shouldn't say I understand the emergency nature of it. My assumption is it was not planned in advance as you plan for the budget. So in case of other types of disasters or emergency, how do you then plan for your potential overtime, and how do you plan for that?
Well, that's a good question, but what we've done here is that we've activated our emergency services unit under our current protocols to address the issues and getting people out there. You did mention earlier the concerns about staffing and where the staff came from. I believe Supervisor Ronan mentioned that. I wanted to emphasize the point that our normal ESU activations do this every day. So in the event we do have something such as a high-risk court presence or something along the lines of our everyday operations, the ESU is activated in this manner to address immediate needs. This long-term deployment will affect our mutual aid funding, which the undersheriff referenced, but the plan in and of itself is to be responsive to the needs of the city. As you mentioned, it's a collective effort, and this is our contribution to that effort.
Thank you. And I'm trying to, and my apologies, and as I'm going through the appropriation book, and I'm trying to understand where it is, which category is it under as for the emergency units? Because I'm trying to match up the $685K.
I don't actually have the spreadsheet in front of me, but when I get upstairs, I'll find it.
I appreciate it. Sometimes I forget you're just upstairs. I appreciate that. Thank you. And Supervisor Safai.
Thank you. There seems to be a little bit of a contradiction. We're talking about the need for more law enforcement, but it looks like here the mayor reduced your uniform employees by $3 million in this budget. Is that right? That's on your slide here. It says mayor's requested reductions. $3 million for uniform employees, and then almost another $2.4 million for miscellaneous and overtime. Is that right?
Thank you, Supervisor. That is correct. There was an ask from the mayor's office to reduce 5%. We actually had worked with our budget analyst, who was present, was very helpful, and we indicated that we could not reduce by 5%, but we thought we would be able to reduce 2.5%.
No, I got it. I see that. I just want to make sure I'm just reading it right. Like, you guys are being asked to reduce the number of law enforcement by the mayor's office.
We were asked to cut overall, and those are the reductions we identified.
Got it. I mean, well, that's the only place you can cut.
Sure.
Is you cut staff. So it's more of a yes or no.
But can I just add, Supervisor? No. I just wanted to say why we cut. It has to do with hiring and how we can actually hire people off of lists as well. That's
I get
all.
it.
Okay.
I get it. Okay. So the other thing too, this emergency services unit. I want to talk to the sheriff, if I can, please. This emergency services unit, this was the sheriff's department initiative, correct? This came from you, Sheriff?
Yes, it did.
And so this was your way of responding to the call because of the level of response needed on the streets of San Francisco, particularly in areas of high level of drug dealing and drug use.
Absolutely.
So I just want to give you a minute to talk about that, because while you're being asked to cut your funding, you're still trying to find a creative way to step up and serve in this area.
Absolutely, and I take full ownership for that decision. We have resources available, and we have experienced through many years challenges with budget as a city as a whole. But as was mentioned earlier by Chair Chan, budgets can't be the only reason, fiscal responsibility can't be the only reason to prevent or stop things from occurring, which are for the betterment of the entire community. And that's what we're trying to do, put more people out there to get people to the help they need. This is a way to do it within our current processes with the ESU call-out. And while we are short-staffed, this is a way for us to be able to send people out under our current processes without asking for more funding to hire more people. We already have that funding available, and as was mentioned, we actually had to reduce in certain areas because of that hiring process.
If you can hold on, I want to ask the mayor's budget director. I just want to understand. So there's been a call to expand law enforcement in the city. There's a dramatic need for that. There was supplemental requests put in for the police department. Why is the sheriff's department being asked to cut?
Yeah, the sheriff's department has had some savings this year from vacancies in their budget. As the undersheriff also mentioned, they saw overtime go down this year. So they've been able to manage within their own budget this year by making operational decisions to deploy the resources they have as efficiently as they can. We've asked them to do that again next year, and they've indicated that they can continue to deliver those services with the budget that they have for next year.
I understand, but it just seems a bit of a contradiction. We heard from Supervisor Ronan, and I know this is something that came up earlier in the day about the backlog in the courts and the low level of staffing and that impact that's directly related to your one of the contributing factors. It says here that you're about 185 or 151 short in terms of the authorized sworn. I see 151 on your chart, and I thought I heard you say 185.
I think the total 185 includes supervisors, managers, all
Got
the
it.
other open
Okay,
positions.
so front line it's 150. Oh, okay.
Yes.
If you add all that up, it adds up to sheriff's captain, lieutenant,
And
sergeant.
Supervisor, the sheriff's department can speak to this best, but they do have this unit, what the sheriff mentioned, they were able to deploy. But a lot of their staffing is also within the jails, in the jail system, which is a very different type of staffing and operation than some of our other law enforcement units and agencies.
Right. But the whole system is kind of intertwined in terms of the staffing decisions. The other thing that I wanted to ask a question about, because while you're short, then there's also this issue of longevity pay. And I know that was supported in other first responder areas, and it was not supported in your department. What kind of impact is that going to have in terms of retirements? Because you're already 185 short, and you all were not authorized in this budget for mitigation pay. How many more sheriffs are going to be retiring because they're not enticed to stay like the other first responders?
It does make it a challenge for us. Anecdotally, when we canvass staff, not ourselves, but other agencies canvass our staff in regards to what their interest would be in retention and longevity pay. A lot of people responded that they would be interested in staying longer if that option was available. I can't predict how many people. We can only work on the assumption that our attrition rate will remain the same as we move forward into this next fiscal year. I hope that we won't see a bump because of that. I do know that there is promise that as we enter into contract negotiations during this next fiscal year, that there is going to be some support. At least there's absolute support from myself and my agency
and I understand the Deputy Sheriff's Association also supports the longevity.
Yes.
I mean, I know in the past, there's always closed contracts, open contracts, but there's the ability to even mid-contract to negotiate something like this if you're confronted with a significant. So what did you said? If the attrition rate remains the same, what would be potentially the number of deputy sheriffs that would retire before the contract opens again?
Yeah, anywhere from 40 up to 70, I believe our attrition rate is close to that number.
And that almost is equal to your goal of hiring another 75 deputy sheriffs.
Yes.
So while we could, in the worst case scenario, stay exactly the same.
Yes, and although we did hire more than we lost this upcoming number, it's not a number that was very high. We got ahead, but we didn't get far
Who has
ahead.
to agree? Is it the HR department, the deputy sheriffs, and you? Is it the mayor's office, the HR department, deputy sheriffs, and you that have to agree to try to deal with this before? Oh, our controller.
I can answer that one just because it's structural. Under the charter, the mayor is the chief negotiator for the city, subject to approval by the Board of Supervisors of any agreements ratified with a recognized labor organization.
So maybe I don't know if that's something that you wanted to weigh in on, Ms. Dooning.
All I can add is that, this year we were scheduled to bargain with the Police Officers Association and 798. So there was no negotiation with DSA this year.
No, I understand that, but often...
And there will be next year when their contracts are up with the rest of miscellaneous employees.
I understand that, but I also understand that if you're facing a somewhat of a potential crisis, that's something that could be engaged on sooner. And if the decision rests solely with the mayor's office, and then we're looking already at a shortage, and then we're being asked to deploy, and there's new initiatives coming, and the jails are short, wouldn't that be a motivation under these circumstances to potentially engage on this sooner? And I don't know if you're the right person to ask on that.
Yeah, all I can say on that, Supervisor Safi, is that I think you well know that we have vacancies in the city across a lot of areas. I mean, hospital workers, nurses, deputy sheriffs, others. We will be negotiating with a number of them very soon. And so there'll be an opportunity to address some of those issues.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any other questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Mandelman.
Thank you, Chair Chan. I don't have hard questions. I just want to thank the department for, possibly turning the tide on your vacancies. We hope this year stepping up to help us deal with our budgetary shortfall, and most especially stepping up with the Emergency Services Unit to address San Francisco's most pressing public policy problem, which in my view requires both a public health and a public safety response, and thanks for being part of it.
Thank you, Supervisor.
Thank you, Sheriff. Seeing no other questions, appreciate it, and thank you so much for the information. Just want to, I already said it, but I'd like to repeat it just in case. Before you reappear again, just wanted to make sure that we have that information in advance. Thank you,
Thank you very
Sheriff.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Richard Green. Can we hear from the next speaker, please?
Hi, Supervisors. I'm Ken Lamba, DSA President. I thank you for your time, first of all, and you brought up some very good concerns with staffing with the Sheriff's Department, and so have some of the speakers or residents here. They're in fear for their safety. Some of them have been violently attacked, and they have family members that are in danger in the city. The Sheriff's Department spoke, and he stepped up, and he activated the Emergency Service Unit to assist in the Tenderloin, which is a great thing, and we support that. But also we have a staffing problem which could be resolved now with the longevity incentive. The mayor denied it recently, and it's frustrating to hear when the police department comes in and gets civilian positions where police officer positions are civilianized, and they get that, but the mayor denies law enforcement positions to the Sheriff's Department where they could retain them. It makes absolutely no sense. There's the ability to retain about 50 to 70
Thank
deputy
you, Ken Lamba,
sheriffs.
for sharing your comments with the committee. We've reached the minute limit, so we have to hear from the next speaker. Those will be the speakers that are connected remotely.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your comments. Could we please be connected to the first of our remote callers?